Artemis Take 3 is almost here. NASA has been trying to get back to the moon since the start of the century, when the space shuttle's luster and excitement for low Earth orbit activities began to wane. But redoing the glory days of Apollo is really hard and really expensive. You can't just dust off a mothballed Saturn V and stick a new capsule on top. Sadly, there are no Saturn V rockets that aren't just stripped out exhibits in NASA museums, and would want better tech in our rockets after 50 years, right? But now, with a new mega rocket, NASA's ready to go again, not just to low Earth orbit, like every human spaceflight since 1972, but back to the moon. Anyone who watches this channel regularly will know I said that a couple of months ago when the Artemis 1 mission was stacked and ready to go at Kennedy Space Center. But, you know, hardware problems and a hurricane, that can delay things. But NASA's ready to go again for this historic flight. And here's how you can watch all of it, find out more about it, and enjoy all of the build-up. And if you're not the sort of YouTube watcher who wants to hang around for the whole video, the best thing you can do is dip into the official NASA or European Space Agency streams that we've put in the show notes below. There's going to be a lot of build-up shows over the weekend, and of course, the launch itself on Wednesday. But if you are the sort of person who wants to know more, soak up all the excitement, all the run-up, let me know in the comments below about any other streams that you'll be watching. Share the love so that other people, other viewers, can enjoy those streams too. There'll be a lot of YouTubers with their own live content, but none of the ones that we'd recommend are confirmed yet. So drop the feeds you'd recommend in the comments. So the first time NASA attempted a launch of their new Mega Moon rocket was on the 29th of August when a faulty temperature sensor on one of the rocket engines forced a scrub. Then NASA tried again on the 3rd of September, but this time a leak in the fuel supply line forced an abort, with launch windows in late September being rejected due to weather on the Florida coast, not least the devastating Hurricane Ian. That means that NASA have set the third attempt, fourth if you count in the abandoned Hurricane launch window, for the 16th of November. That's next Wednesday if you're watching this video as we released it, unless there have been more problems between me recording and releasing this video. In fact, subtropical storm Nicole whipped up enough to delay this launch again from Monday the 14th to Wednesday the 16th of November. But for now, as I record this, the rocket, designed to withstand wind gusts up to 85 miles an hour, stays on the pad and is go for launch to the moon on Wednesday, anytime from 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time, that's 6:04 a.m. in the UK and 7:04 a.m. in Central Europe. The launch window only lasts for 69 minutes, so if it does go, that'll be a night launch, and we know from the Apollo days that the rocket engine fire during the night launch of Apollo 17 was visible 500 miles away by people as far north as North Carolina and as far south as Cuba. And Artemis 1 is going to produce more than £1 million more thrust than the Saturn V. So if you're watching this after the event, do let everyone know how far away you could see it from if you're in the United States. If the launch does go ahead on the 16th of November, this would provide a mission lasting around 25.5 days with a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean on Sunday 11th of December, meaning the crew make it back for the holiday season. And if you didn't see my last video on this, Artemis 1 is the first launch of the full rocket and capsule stack. So doesn't have a human crew, thankfully. But it will clear the way for a human crew on the next launch to the moon if this flight goes well. Instead, Artemis 1 has 3 test dummies to test the effect of radiation on the body during a long duration mission outside the Earth's protective magnetic field. and Shaun the sheep and Snoopy are going along for the ride. The rocket, with its precious ovine and canine crew, was rolled out to the historic Pad 39B last Friday, the pad where 53 space shuttle missions, Apollo-Soyuz, Skylab and Apollo 10 were all launched since 1969. And what a fantastic return to sending people to the moon that makes. But if this attempt doesn't go ahead for any reason, NASA have backup launch opportunities, with available launch windows on Saturday, November the 19th at 1:45 a.m. Eastern Time. These alternatives also provide an exciting night launch. But whether it launches on the 16th or the 19th, or has to wait it out for a later launch window, the important thing is that NASA gets a flawless flight under its belt to test out the giant new moon rocket, the SLS, and the shiny new crew capsule, Orion, on a long duration moon trip. After 11 years in development, we just want to see the rocket launch without any catastrophic hiccups and set the stage for a crewed flight in a couple of years' time. So let me know in the comments what you think. Will it go on this attempt, or will we have to wait a bit? If it does go, will it be a success? Well, even in the run-up, NASA has quite a few TV programs and briefings planned that will tell you all about the Artemis mission and its current status, and let you watch the preparations, launch and progress in space. They'll all be available on NASA TV that you can get online with the link in the show notes below, or on your normal TV if you're in the United States. Starting 3 days before the planned launch is a pre-launch briefing from the mission manager, launch director, chief flight director and the all-important weather officer. That will tell us all about the preparations and the latest flight status. Then on Monday the 14th November at noon, that's 5 p.m. in the UK and 6 p.m. in Central Europe, there's the Artemis 1 countdown status briefing. So that's really going to whet our appetites for the mission. Then, the day before the launch, there's the big build-up with a live feed of the rocket coming alive as they load the propellant and oxidizer, starting at 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. UK and 10 p.m. in Central Europe. All ready for the actual launch from 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time early Wednesday morning. That's 6:04 a.m. in the UK and 7:04 a.m. in Central Europe, which of course is all wrapped up in footage and coverage either side of the launch itself. The rest of Wednesday is filled with post-launch briefings, updates and imagery from space with the NASA administrator, the Artemis mission manager and the chief flight director. During this and all future Artemis missions to the moon, it will burn its solid rocket boosters until they run out of fuel, and then continue rising under the power of its 4 main engines until they also run out of fuel. As you can see, most of any rocket is just fuel and engines to get the smallest part of the stack to space, and after 8.5 minutes the Orion capsule will reach orbit. 2 hours after that, the upper stage engines will send the capsule off onto a lunar trajectory, and the Orion capsule will be on its way to the moon. Once at the moon, the Orion capsule will enter a distant retrograde orbit where it will be as close as 69 miles away from the moon on one side of its orbit and a record-breaking 40,000 miles away on the far side loop of the orbit. During this orbit, it'll deploy 10 science CubeSats before heading back home for a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean near San Diego, California. This test run to the moon, if successful, then opens the door for a rerun with 4 astronauts and more science satellites in May 2024. If Artemis 2 is successful, Artemis 3, still scheduled for 2025 but probably more likely to be in 2026, will be this generation's Apollo 11. Artemis 3 should put the first footprints from a woman and a person of colour on the surface of the moon, with a landing in the lunar South Pole. But the Artemis program is planned to be much more than Apollo was. Rather than a mad scramble to beat the Russians, grab some rocks and then quit as the American public lost interest and Congress pulled the plug, Artemis is planned to be mankind finally creating a permanent presence in space on the moon and further into the solar system than ever before. You could say it's the sci-fi future we were all promised in the 60s and 70s before those dreams evaporated in the 80s and 90s. So do make the most of this first step back to the exciting future we lost. Enjoy.